Hey, all you cool cats and kittens. I hope you're taking a break from watching Tiger King, and it was a crazy show. Like, I watched the extra episode on Netflix yesterday, so let's say I haven't seen anything. I haven't seen anything that crazy in a very long time. Well, the things that keep us sane when we're stuck at home. Anyway, so I just wanted to talk about something real quick that we're on the twin. Now that we're on the 20s, I talked about Red Summer the other day. Actually, went a lot longer than I thought it would. I thought I was only going to go for like 6 or 7 minutes, but there's just so much tied into that. And something else that there's a lot tied into is the Red Scare. Now, there's been several Red Scares throughout the 20th century. Um, the one that's more well known is around the 50s when you had this senator named Joseph McCarthy. He played into people's fears of the Russians and communist, and basically it would more or less create witch hunts. Now basically what this did was this caused a lot of people to just end up getting labeled, and really they may not get convicted, but they end up getting blacklisted, and they're not able to work in their industry again. They're not able to work for the government. There are a lot of people in Hollywood that's just entertainment's about perception. So it's like once they got that negative label, they couldn't shake it. But anyway, that was the 50s. Now, the first Red Scare had similar things happen, only they're probably a bit worse. Now, you could say the Red Scare started in 1917. Well, in the U.S. at least. What you had the Russian Revolution going on, and Russia has just been in upheaval for a while. People are angry, people are bitter. They still basically have a czar, which is basically a Russian version of a king in charge. And really, he's not, looking at him compared to other rulers, he's not really that bad, but he's also not that great. He's kind of lived in royalty land for a very long time, so he's kind of, he's just not a good leader. And as a lot of the leaders were in Europe, they were not very good leaders. But anyway, one thing too, most of the leaders of Europe were during World War I were related in some way. And I actually read that Kaiser Wilhelm, who was in charge of Germany, his cousin was Tsar Nicholas II of Russia. He didn't think he was going. He tried to do a power move. He tried to pull a power move on him, a little political power move. And I actually read the letter, the translated letter. I can't read Russian or German, and the language was just so ridiculous. You had Nicholas II going, "Oh, I'm sorry, my dearest cousin Wilhelm, but just for the sake of my people and my country, I cannot let this go by. I apologize, but I'm going to have to declare war." It's just crazy to look at. And their conversations were just, anyway, I'm getting way off track. Okay, so Red Scare, 1917. You have the Russian Revolution going on. You have all these real radical ideas going on in Eastern Europe and concentrating Eastern Europe and Russia. This idea of redistribution of wealth, which is, it's a form of socialism. Now, in most societies, we have some type of distribution of wealth. Communism takes it to an extreme. You give the power to the federal government, to the central government, give all the power, all final say, and everyone is equal, and everyone, and everyone's happy until reality kicks in, which when you give a government that much power, there's no check on them. It's human nature. It's going to get corrupted at some point. But anyway, in Russia, you had this revolution. Tsar gets killed, which it was very rare for a leader. It still is very rare for a leader to get killed off. And they killed off his whole bloodline just, so they wouldn't rise again. And then you put this really, really, radical guy, very intelligent guy. I mean, he is a very intelligent guy in Vladimir Lenin, but he's extremely radical, and to him the methods always justify the means. So basically you have these real bloody revolutions go on, and it basically turns into you're either for or against us. And Russia is in chaos. And then what you have is you have a lot of immigrants. You've had a lot of immigrants over time coming to the United States, and people are seeing this. People are seeing all these. They're hearing of all these, wild ideas going on in Europe, and people are getting scared. And then they're looking at these immigrants coming in, and just by association, assuming, well, these people are going to topple the U.S. So you have this real nativist and a lot of times, racist approach, or bigoted approach to how they're perceiving these immigrants. And what you ended up having was, these people were basically sent to ghettos, not so much, not like a concentration camp so much, but more or less they're just cast off. They're the outcasts of society. There's a reason why the organized crime really kicked off. Prohibition helped too, but a lot of that was because, it's, you're an immigrant, it's hard. It was just hard back then. It still is. It's hard. It was just really, really hard back then. But anyway, what ended up happening is you had this thing called, out of this fear came the Espionage Act. You had the Espionage Act of 1917. And what this did was this restricted people from really speaking out against the government. Now, the First Amendment is pretty much the backbone of our Constitution, of what our laws and really what our way of life are based off of. Sorry, got a phone call. And they're going to have to wait. Anyway, and this brought up the question, well, how can you restrict the First Amendment? How can you restrict freedom of speech? It's common sense. Not everything that comes out of everyone's mouth is okay. You can't you can't threaten somebody. You can't threaten bodily harm on somebody. You can't do something that's going to cause harm to a lot of people. That's just common sense. So basically, this ends up going to the Supreme Court because you're having people arrested. For simply speaking out against the war or speaking out against the government in some way, disagreeing if you're an immigrant. Because then if authorities decide to, they can charge you with the Espionage Act, and then you're deported. Now, one thing that happened during this time was the Palmer raids, where basically they targeted certain groups of Eastern Europeans and Italians. And with these raids, they basically accused them of violating the Espionage Act, that they're working against the government. Basically, you're a communist. And then, the people, those immigrants, they either may not understand the American legal system too well, or they may not understand the ins and outs of what they need to do to get out of it. Basically, most of them were convicted without much of a trial, and they were deported. Now, if you were a citizen, they could send you to prison. Now, one guy from the area, named Eugene Debs, he ran several times for president. He's from Terre Haute, by the way. He was the biggest name as far as socialists go in America. And he actually did several years in prison for violating the Espionage Act because he was sending out pamphlets speaking out against U.S. participation in World War I, and that was deemed too radical. And that's just like, oh, well, you're violating the Espionage Act. And he just took his time in prison and just was like, nope, I'm right. I'm right. I mean, I'm not going to back down. So he really stuck to his guns there. But anyway, so you had this Supreme Court case called. Let me look it up real fast because I always mess it up. I always mess up the name of it. I don't want to say it wrong. Okay, Schneck. I was going to say Shrek, but Schneck against the United States. Now, what happened was you had these people that were dropping. They were dropping little flyers from the top of a roof, and it was basically, they were politically motivated. I mean, they were just, kind of not really with their manifesto, but their political beliefs and things like that. It's like, hey, come join us, come to this meeting, da 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 da. Well, anyway, I mean, it was nothing too bad, because really it's protected in the First Amendment. You have the right to organize. Well, anyway, they were immigrants that dropped these, and what you had was they ended up going to the Supreme Court because they were, threatened to be deported for violating the Espionage Act. So they, the Supreme Court, now the decision was unanimous, and it was upheld that they violated the Espionage Act. However, there's, of course they got railroaded, but this was also an interesting case because this was the first time the Supreme Court that it was asserted that, there were limits to free speech. If there are things that can cause harm, because they took it a step further and decided, well, there are things that can cause harm to people, such as yelling fire in a movie theater or someone yelling, because this was one thing that did happen a lot, but this was one thing that people were afraid of back then. It didn't happen that often, but it had happened. So an anarchist just decides to throw a bomb into a crowd. If someone yells bomb, then all of a sudden people stampede and, they can end up hurting somebody. But anyway, it was decided, there's certain things that are not socially acceptable to say, and thus, it should be against the law. Again, don't yell fire in a movie theater. Don't yell bomb on an airplane. Don't say things that really are obviously going to cause harm to people. Now, this was the first time this had happened. I mean, this is actually a very dangerous step to make because now, U.S. has been around for almost 150 years. Now's the point. You're setting limits. So some people, not most, but most people were just like, yeah, that makes sense. But there were some that were a little afraid, being like, well, they just limited the Supreme Court just limited the First Amendment. Where does it go now? How far are these limits going to go? Are we going to go even farther, with it? Look at Russia. Look how, it's scary over there. Their government restricts more. And look, we just had, our freedom of speech restricted. It turned out not to be that bad. One thing that helped too was it was the Roaring 20's and everybody was having a really good time. Supposedly. Okay, so gonna go into the Roaring 20's a little bit. I talked about the Red Scare there with the Roaring 20's. With the Roaring 20's, you had a lot of things happen. You had of course, you had Prohibition. You had Prohibition, which, as soon as you tell somebody they can't, as soon as you tell a group of people they can't do something, what are they going to do? Oh, yeah, they're going to defy it. But anyway, so America, 18th Amendment, you're not allowed to drink. Well, people are going to find a way. And, a lot of cops don't like this law either. They're going to turn a blind eye. Now, where are people going to get away with this at? They're going to get away with it in the cities. They're going to get away with it more in the cities because you have, you have always had two parts of America. You have the cities, you have the rural areas. Rural areas, like where we're at right now in, East Central Illinois. You have to drive several miles to sometimes go to the grocery store. I live in Casey, so I got to get to the nearest Walmart. I got to drive to Marshall. Well, that's a small Walmart. Well, if I don't, If I don't find what I need there, I gotta drive all the way to Terre Haute. Gotta drive into another state. But anyway, so in the city, there are people live on people in the city. There's more businesses, there's more people, there's more opportunity to get things. So you had speakeasies emerge. These speakeasies, which basically the reason why it's called a speakeasy is because you usually get this password and you say speakeasy and then they let you in. It's a secret. Oh my goodness. This reminds me of a clip from The Simpsons. If I can find it, I'll put it on Google Classroom so you can watch it because it's a great example of the speakeasy and it's pretty hilarious. But anyway, basically, now where are people getting this liquor because it's not allowed to sell in America? Well, it's where organized crime comes in. You end up having the mob come in. They can go to Canada, then go to Mexico. Not Mexico too much because it was their government was kind of all over the place at that time. A lot of times they would go to Canada and they would smuggle it in, and they come in through Detroit or places like that. And then depending where they went, if they came through Detroit or they came across lake or they came down Lake Michigan or something like that, or they would go into New York. If they went through New York State, like through Buffalo, they would end up going to New York City. If they came in more towards Detroit, they would come into Indiana, and then they would go into Chicago. Or, those are basically the two bases. But Chicago, it's kind of shocking. We're in Illinois. We're only like 400 miles from Canada. But anyway, you had organized crime emerge. You had all this liquor kind of legally coming in, and it became the cool thing in the cities. It's like, you're doing that. It's like you're breaking even though everybody else is doing it, you're breaking the rules. You're defying the government, and it's like, you know what? I can get arrested. I don't care. I'm going to enjoy myself. Well, you had this enjoyment, this added in with, our prosperity after World War One. It's like we were one of the only countries that came out relatively unscathed in World War One. And also one other thing that came up was this is where Herbert Hoover comes into play. Herbert Hoover, who later, infamously was our president during the stock market crash. He had become a big time grocer. He was one of the biggest businessmen in the nation, and he basically controlled the whole West Coast as far as food goes. But he used his money, his connections, and basically his business know-how to pretty much feed America and feed the Allies. And some of the ideas that came out of it was, crop production, plant a whole lot more, plant them closer together. What can we do to plant more faster? What can we do to get the most out of our land and all this area? So what you got this overabundance now of food because, we aren't just growing food. We're just growing food for ourselves. We're growing our food for ourselves, ourselves, England, France, some of Russia, all this. But anyway, during World War One, so we're still in the mode of, kind of overproducing the farms. This is one reason for the stock market crash, which I'll get into this later. It's the reason that's really overlooked. But anyway, so basically you have all this food, or you have all this, or you have all these crops being created. Well, we actually have we have too much food for people to eat. So what are we going to do? We're going to sell it. We'll sell it to other countries. Well, Europe's war-torn. We'll help them out. All this. So that helps boom our economy a little bit. Now, eventually the bubble is going to burst with stock market crash. But, that's not the only reason. There's several, but that's, it's a bunch of bubbles bursting at once. But anyway, so really the 20s are just kind of a good time to live. I kind of wonder, I grew up in the 90s, and I kind of wonder how similar, how good things were in the 90s compared to the 20s. Now, the impression you get is everyone's wild, everyone's going all over the place, everyone's, it's just like Great Gatsby. But that's really the cities. You have this, up until this point, the rural areas are much more of the focus. When people think of America, they're thinking of the rural areas. They're thinking of the farmers. They're thinking of the frontier. They're thinking of this. They're thinking of that. Now, people are more focused on people are a lot more focused on the cities, the city life, the nightlife. You got the Harlem Renaissance, you got the Jazz Age, movies. It's not too long now. People are going to start talking in movies. I mean, you have this glitzy glam. You have this idea of a glitzy glamour life in the cities. Meanwhile, the Roaring 20s, kind of just business as usual out in the rural areas, and people are looking at the cities, and they're seeing kind of, people are really losing their morals. I mean, they're really, really, really losing their morals, and they're not. It's so much against what people in the rural areas believe in. They're just like, they start to hate city people. Now a couple other things with the 20s. You got the, you have, you saw an earlier video, Henry Ford with his assembly line and the Model Ts. Yeah. Well, anyway, he was able to produce several more cars a day, and just quickly, and cheaper, more efficient. More people are driving, more expansion. People are able to drive to more towns. They're able to spend the money. This is another boom. You just got a time where you can afford to have really crummy presidents. No offense to the presidents of the 20s, but not the best presidents. Like Warren G. Harding. Warren G. Harding was fairly corrupt and didn't really do a whole lot. But we kind of didn't really need a strong president at the time. Calvin Coolidge followed, and he had it right. He knew things were going good at the time, so he was just like, well, what do I need to do? It's like, what do I really need to do? I mean, there was one time he actually left office for 6 weeks. He went on a vacation and just fished. Not even kidding. He fished out west. I think he was in Idaho, but it's just like for 6 straight weeks, our leader was out fishing. Anyway, then you had Herbert Hoover come in, and I'm going to talk about Hoover a lot more later, which people, just letting you know, everyone loved when he got elected president and lead up to presidency. It wasn't a question who was going to get elected president. Everyone loved Hoover. Because he bailed everyone out. He basically bailed the world out, bailed the Allies out in World War I. Trying to think what else. Now, you have these things. You have this radicalism. You have this city divide. You have this, urban versus rural divide that's occurred. You have a recovery from a war, and this Great Gatsby-like lifestyle kind of provides distraction. It kind of provides a distraction for people. It, kind of provides a distraction to the cities. It's, people in the rural communities, don't really care for it. But anyway, so also other things that happened is you had a rise in sports. And up until like 1920, if you looked at professional football, it was seen as, it was not classy. It was not classy whatsoever. It was pretty much like, okay, but NCAA football was completely different. That was considered the real football to watch. Now that all changed with Jim Thorpe kind of put the idea in that professional football isn't so bad. But anyway, then that kind of started the ball rolling. But then Red Grange, he went to Illinois. Greatest play in Illinois history, and that's a team that had that's a college that had Dick Butkus and George Halas. But anyway, so Red Grange, he goes to Illinois. He is absolutely ridiculous. He is the best football player in the country. He is the second coming of Jim Thorpe. He gets a great nickname, the Galloping Ghost, because he just gallops down the field. Nobody can tackle him. He will slip through. But anyway, he decides to play professional football. And anyway, they sold out Yankee Stadium with 75,000 people the first game just to see him, because he was, and this completely changed football. This is now where, they're not going to play at high school fields. They're going to play in big old stadiums. There's a reason why, Soldier Field, Lambeau Field, those came around real close to each other. You had the Chicago Bears originally played in Decatur, and they were called the Decatur Staleys. They were playing at basically what would be the equivalent of a high school field nowadays. High school stands, 1,000 people there, maybe if you're lucky. Now it's like, nope, we're going to move to Chicago. We're going to have we're going to build this big old stadium. That's still there today. Anyway, so people are paying attention to sports more. You have a big old Babe Ruth, who's absolutely ridiculous. I mean, it's, I've studied Babe Ruth's career. I've done statistical analysis for papers in the past. It's just crazy how far ahead Babe Ruth was ahead of his peers as far as ability goes, and just, the stats he put up. Anyway, so 1920 in baseball, you had before it was called the dead ball era. Sometimes they would use the same ball throughout the entire game. Sometimes throughout the entire game. I'm not even kidding. Like, they'd hit a home run or hit a foul ball and be like, hey, you got to go get that ball. it's basically just like playing in the backyard. But anyway, so a ball's going to get beat up, and, it's not really, the spitball was allowed. You could spit on the ball, go, tiah. You could cut it. You could do all kinds of stuff with it. You could use, there's a pitch known as the shine ball. Use a foreign substance. Use some type of cream, something like that. Throw a curveball, just drops, whoop. Can't hit it. So you didn't have a whole lot of offense. Well, 1920 rolls around, and they start to change it a little bit. They add more baseballs. They add better baseballs. They wound them tighter. And then this is just going to lead to a big boom in run production and just, offense in general. And it's just going to make the game a lot more interesting. Now, one guy that came around this time was Babe Ruth, who was just a beast. He, in case you all don't know, he started out as a pitcher. If the Cy Young Award didn't exist back then, but if it had, he would have won it once. No doubt. Might have won it twice, but no doubt he would have won it once. He still holds a pitching record. He has the most shutouts by a left-hander in the American League. He had a 9-1 season, which nobody's going to beat that, especially not this year. But anyway, he started as a pitcher, but he was an incredible hitter. He was very strong. He hit 4 home runs just when he was pitching. And, 4 home runs, it was just like, oh, wow, he hit 4 home runs. The leader that year hit 7. Then the next year he hit 11, and people were just like, oh, my, and he led the league, and he's still pitching. It's like, oh, my goodness. People are like, oh. Then he moves to the outfield full time. He hits 29. The most up to this point is 16, so he just destroyed the record. And then the Red Sox trade him to the Yankees. And the Red Sox trade him to the Yankees, and just because the owner didn't like him, was kind of tired of him, was just like, you know what, I can dump a whole lot of salary here. So he goes to the Yankees, and he, first year with new baseball, hits 54 home runs. So, yeah, you had 16, then 29 is the record. Now it's 54. And he hits 59 the next year. And it's like, oh, my goodness. And then, it was a below average season for him, was 40 home runs. And he was hitting more home runs than, whole teams in the league, because they have to adjust. But this is getting a ton of attention. I mean, this is just getting a ton of attention. There, you have these larger in life sports figures. I mean, we still have larger in life sports figures today, and a lot of that started with the 20s. The only larger in life sports figures you had really before the 20s, outside of a few outliers, were boxers. But so anyway, I kind of gave a little intro to the 20s, went a lot longer than I thought I would there, but I hope you enjoy this. I hope you learned a little bit of something, and I'll see you all soon. Stay safe, stay sane.